Ashim Kumar Betal. Before I begin formally, let me just very briefly mention that there are in total 3 lectures that I am delivering. One has already been delivered. And I had spoken about transnational speciality and post-ethnicity. Those of you who are my regular listeners would know some days back at Ramananda College. And on the 22nd of June, I'll be speaking on transnational contestations, home and homelessness for Kharagpur College and Agra College. So today I'll be speaking on the transnational novel. I'll be speaking about what I would designate as a post-colonial cosmopolitanism, and I'll pick up the authenticity debate entailed in it. Let me also mention that Sourav has very wonderfully sandwiched me between 2 very wonderful speakers, and so I also now occupy a liminal realm, the realm of liminality of time and space. Is working very hard on me. So I have decided not to make an extensive lecture this time because I want some time for your observations as well. And so without further ado, let me begin consequently. Edifice of transnationalism. It basically involves cross-border political space. I'm not using the term inter-border because when you hyphenate the compound word with an inter-hyphen, you categorize categorical differences. Like for instance, when we use the term interdisciplinary, we actually imply disciplinary exchange where the disciplines in themselves remain distinct. And yet there is interaction between them. So transdisciplinary would be more facilitatory when we talk about such kind of admixtures. The transnational theory in general emphasizes that it is not always nation states who directly interact, who are the only significant actors involved. Since there are direct linkages across international boundaries, the prevalent context might also include indirect partners in consideration. For example, NGOs, corporations, funding bodies, publishing houses, so on and so forth. Let us note that it is because of transnationalism that the economic, mass media linked and transportation facilitatory globalization phenomena is operative. So if globalization is the economic global village, as McLuhan and others mentioned, transnationalism would rather imply a global social theory. And consequently, we must also note that in this regard, the term diaspora mainly refers to the old Greek sense of ethnic dispersions. People leaving territorial roots in bunches, oftentimes in bunches, and transnationalism would involve a broader geosocial, politico-capitalist interactions across nation boundaries. So a transnational migrant doesn't, in that sense, leave the original home country for permanent settlement, even though he might or she might take citizenship abroad. And the boundaries between the host and the home country remains blurred. There are multiple networks of connection to the country of origin and also the country of settlement, which is by choice or compulsion. And this is what the Encyclopedia of Critical Psychology by Springer mentions about transnational migration theory, which is defined by Deborah Upegui Hernandez, based on the idea that the identity question or questions related to identity for a transnational becomes necessarily plurisignified. Diasporans maintain strong ties with their homelands, often politically, the Jews for Palestine, the Canadian Punjabis funding for Khalistan. But transnationals, they exert physical and psychological belonging to different realms and different contexts as well, to multiple places of affiliation. So in a way, transnationalism is actually a weakening of the nation state and the nation state's formidable control over borders, inhabitants, and territory. This has major implications when it comes to selective or mass migrations, refugeehood, exile, expatriatehood, and multinational investment of capital and ideas. The traditional modality of power flow via constitutionally legitimate national and state governmental machineries are getting relocated, but not by replacing the former via supranational groups. There is an increasing difficulty to define the new actors to social mobility. But at the same time, let us note, as Catherine Willis observes, that it becomes increasingly important to register what is designated as movements from below, with or without some bit of governmental or political patronage. These are hugely populist in nature also, often involving questions and struggles with environmental, human, citizenship, and civil rights. Mina Alexander mentions in Fault Lines, note the title of the text very carefully, "That's all I am, a woman cracked by multiple migrations." The question I'm proposing today in this lecture, can the transnational novel speak, culls the Spivakian query, which many interpreters consider tautological. When white people speak to white people about colored people, the very efficacy of representation is called to question. Brown academia, third world intellectualism, and feminist discourses get subdued in the process. Similarly, how come a category of fiction that is not exclusively affiliated to any one domain of space configuration and place specifics be treated seriously? Straddlers of culture don't have affiliations, it is conventionally believed, which is what I'm trying to challenge. So are they treated seriously? Not in the popular context they create, but the ideology they deliver. And accepted the fact that when we talk about ethnic loyalty and such, purist terms, these issues become a problematic which is not easily resolved. It speaks in profundity to whom it addresses. Let me not get into demographical specifics, but I'd like to mention that statistically concerned, India has one of the largest diasporas in America. But even that, I have found out, accounts for hardly less than 2% of the total US population. At the same time, the diasporas, as we conventionally understand them, are sometimes huge in number, as the Circassian diaspora might be concerned, which has over 4 million people worldwide in places as diverse as Bulgaria, Cyprus, Egypt, Israel, Jordan, Kosovo, Lebanon, Romania, Serbia, Syria, the former USSR, North America, Canada, and Australia. However, the question of affiliation also raises the problematic of authenticity. We must note that it was T.B. Macaulay's explicit desire, as expressed in his rather infamous minute of 1835, where he sought a clerical class of Indians who are Indians in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinion, in morals, and in intellect. The genetic racial base, in Marxian terms, is completely subsumed, unlike the Marxian ideology postulates, in the cultural superstructure provided by the imperial master. However, those Englishmen were also the ones who divided the Brown Sahibs and the Eurasians, also known as the Anglo-Indian community, because of their fanciful and impractical ideas and policies regarding miscegenation. It is because after cultural remodification, the native oblique Oriental becomes more Philistine than the white. This term that the native or the Oriental is more Philistine than the white is taken from V.S. Naipaul's The Middle Passage. This is a lamentation by Naipaul, but can't be helped. Many of us can recall the controversial tussle between the hallowed JNU professor Meenakshi Mukherjee and the Indian expatriate writer Vikram Chandra. Mukherjee accused diasporic Indian authors of being inauthentic in their representation of the homeland. This led to Vikram Chandra's wonderful essay, The Cult of Authenticity, in 2000, released in 2000 in the Boston Review, where a campist debate about what constitutes true Indianness was being made. There were questions, there were charges like, how can you live abroad and write about India? In response, the answer was, what an odd question this was, coming from a room full of Indians who had probably studied Wordsworth under neem trees and written authoritatively about the idea of Byron from Allahabad. Another question about Ardhashir Vakil's novel Beach Boy. Please note that this is now a major text in the CBCS Popular Culture Optional, about the elaborate preparation of Bhel Puri, becomes an object of suspicion for the native academics. Was that an emigrant's nostalgia, or was it written for the Westerners who don't know what Bhel Puri is? This was the charge leveled against Vakil. The reply was, the writer loves to delight in the mundane. Delighting in the mundane is what the writer does and loves doing. Even Vikram Chandra's short story collection, Love and Longing in Bombay, had received such charges. One such charge being why there are components titled under Sanskrit tags like dharma, artha, kama. In reply, the writer mentioned that such terms implied duty, gain, desire, how they worked their way through ordinary lives, and the interlocutor was not happy or satisfied hearing the answer that the burnished glow of the Sanskrit, their seeming distance from the gritty landscape of the stories themselves, was reason enough. Now, these titles were to signal Indianness in the West. So the common charge is this, that these writers are more concerned about the lack of their Indianness more than they're concerned about their art themselves. It troubles NRI writers, or for that matter, I'm not just mentioning only about Indians and their Indiannesses. This charge can also be extended to the Pakistani diasporic writers, the Turkish diasporic writers, the Bangladeshi diasporic writers, as to how much of Turkishness or Bangladeshiness, or for that matter, any nationness is there in the given nationality of the writer. Now, this charge cannot be easily refuted, but the commonsensical idea that can be derived is that Indian cultural commissars, they don't worship their art properly. The same can be levied about allusions regarding ordinary people, that this charge came about that they don't represent or they don't address ordinary people. They address a very specific group of diasporans only, which again becomes a problematic, hard to resolve, because who are ordinary people? What do we understand by the term ordinary? What constitutes ordinariness? Now, these are abstractions which are not easily answered. And at the same time, we must understand that this boom in Indo-Anglian writing, this was initially known as Indo-Anglian writing, is now known as Indian English, which I think is a broad, expandable accommodation of various transnational extensions. Not only the Indo-American camp or the Indo-British camp, but maybe several hyphenated identities that are to be taken into consideration. Now, regional writers, Bhasha writers may or may not get due coverage in the national or even in the regional presses themselves. And in this lack of representation in the media, there is another aspect to be considered, which is the relative difference in royalties between diasporic writers and Bhasha writers. However, let us acknowledge that translation has enabled a Bhasha Mufassil novel to be internationalized. That's the way I see it today. So ultimately, mere slamming of migrant writers helps only gain academic mileage for a few people. But let us also remember, subsequently and adjacently, that academic and critical communities are also restrictive communities. They are also limited coteries. And in a post-truth milieu, the political contestation for the real, and I'm talking about the real in a social sense, not in the psychoanalytical sense, the capital R, is basically a thwarted affair. Now, transnational cosmopolitanism is the easy target of attack because orthodox Desivads and ultranationals, mostly right-wing these days, they target the perceived emerging post-national world order as a threat. Transnational solidarity, hybridized metropoles, migrant spaces are perceived as threats for those who want to gain some political mileage with old slogans. So Leela Gandhi calls for a post-national ethic. And mind you, she advocated this idea way back in 1998 in one of her books. And so she was anticipating the crisis or the crisis of large-scale genocide, ethnic cleansing, and religious fundamentalisms we are perceiving all over the world today. Examples are not necessary to give because they are too evident, too explicit for all those of us who keep some bit of track about international world politics. We would be knowing about that, the Rohingya crisis being an example. Now, this perceives global transnational projects as national agendas as well. So obviously, these days there is the continued legacy of what constitutes the national, what becomes the anti-national. This is a problematic which has campus divides, so no easy answer would satisfy everyone. But let us remember that meanwhile, after the new millennia set in 2000, massive changes had taken place. Like I can give you a real life example of the 2003 Vancouver Declaration by the Dalit diaspora abroad, Vancouver, so I'm talking about Canada, working for the 250 million Dalits in India, promoting interfaith and multiculturalism. Our cultural citizenships are vast and beyond borders. It's something that we have to acknowledge. And old order substitutions are happening in both theory and praxis alike. For instance, Robert J.C. Young has substituted the term third world for a new term, transcontinentalism. Again, Arjun Appadurai's ideas of counter globalization and grassroots globalization cannot really miss out on the very workable interrelationship between the local and the foreign. Or as Ashish Nandi has mentioned about tackling the many forms of institutionalized suffering, note the term institutionalized suffering. Monocultural bullying, teasing, and insinuating is not the new age hallmark of cosmopolitanism, no matter how much we try to make for a resistance for puritanism or purism. I'll give you an example from Sam Selvon's The Housing Lark, where there is this character called Sylvester, in short Sil, who is ridiculed by his friends or his so-called friends because of his mixed identity. Man, you don't know if you are Indian Negro, white, yellow, or blue. Now, such a charge is, in the sense of political appropriateness, not correct today. In this wonderfully miscegenated world today, this is not really workable. It's time for everyone to extend their solidarity to the many degrees of assimilation that we know. So yes, the transcontinental novel or the transnational novel, I'm talking about the transcontinental novel in that sense because the term that I have used by Robert Young, transcontinentalism, reminds me of one of the conclusive stories by Jhumpa Lahiri, The Third and the Final Continent, where it is presumed that there can be individuals who have their loci of identity in more than two places, usually in three places, but this can even be more than three. It is at least three. So it does speak, the transspatial novel, the transcontinental novel, the transnational novel does speak. And we have Suketu Mehta, who had mentioned at one point of time that we are, the transspatials are actually not transnationals, but they are translocal. So basically people who have their stake, material and otherwise, in many different places, maybe when we consider internal migration and expatriate migration as well, they have their moorings, psychological and material, in all these places. They set up their new locales, and by that term, they become the locals of that place as well. So the idea of the local as someone who is a local by birth alone is not tenable these days. And this also leads us to acknowledge, as I would acknowledge, that it's not only these transnational writers who are speaking for this subject matter, Indianness being one of them, not the exclusive thematic content that we are talking about. And at the same time, they are doing this along with the native writers, the writers from the bhashas, their counterparts in translation. Speaking in the Spivakian sense is no longer an exclusive privilege of any exclusive clique. And it is our universal duty to listen to all voices before we can make any sort of theoretical or practical formulation. This much for today. Thank you very much. I have kept some time so that I'll be able to welcome any kind of questions or observations or remarks from your side. So over to you, Sourav. Thank you very much.
Hello.
Yeah.
The floor is now, yes, the floor is now open for the interactive session. If the audience have any question, any kind of suggestion or any comment to make.
Okay.
Yes.
Let me. We already have some comments coming in. I'm really sorry for some lack of clarity. It has been happening for some days because, you know, of the internet problems that we are having and the bad weather. Let me first answer a particular observation that I have seen. Let me clarify a point. I am not reading any of my papers, quote unquote. Okay, I don't know who is gender people here, but let me point out to you, I do some jotting down on a daily basis, and incidentally, there is, am I audible?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, you're
yeah,
audible.
yeah, yeah. So the span of these lectures are so vast, and their subject matter is so diverse that we can't read papers that way. These are all my scribblings that I do at many different points of time, taking your observation all in good faith. Now, the point is, I have been researching in this realm of diasporic theory and praxis ever since my research days, which goes back to 2000 and so the point is, the only reason why we read it out to you is because we have a time scale maintain. It's not like taking a class where, like even in a class, you see that there are time frames to be maintained, and I also have a speaker to follow up with. So I read it fast. I read it so that the content is delivered within a given point of time. Please don't take it otherwise, but if you invite me without a time limit, I'm happy to speak the whole day. Yeah. Okay. Well, we don't have any question as such. Yeah, we have a question from Subhadeep. Subhadeep, thank you very much for your question. It helps a namesake to offer you a question. So, cosmopolitanism, a more radical theoretical framework rather than transnationalism, which doesn't problematize sufficiently the existence of the importance of the modern state, nation state. Yeah, let me point out, Shubhadeep, that cosmopolitanism and transnationalism, they are actually interrelated in multiple ways. And that was the objective of this paper, to point out to all of you that unlike the hardcore binarization that used to be operative in the earlier eras, earlier epochs of diasporic writing, it doesn't happen anymore today. Like this is no longer the milieu when Rushdie or Naipaul or Anita Desai are writing, in that sanitized, more spelt out word of the 70s, 80s, Rowington Mystery and others. So times have changed, and like the concept of home has also expanded a lot. So my contention is, yes, I definitely feel cosmopolitanism or cosmopolitan theories, there are multiple theories there, that accommodates. But cosmopolitanism also becomes feasible, also becomes workable when we have these visible and invisible interactions that take place between different countries. You see, wonderfully put, that it need not always be geospatial differences that maintain our segregation. These webinars, these invited lectures, they can accommodate people from all over the world. This is also an example of that. And the very fact that, there's no need to believe that the nation state is now defined exclusively by its territory. If you have territorialization at work, you also have had deterritorialization at work, and you also have a relentless process of re-territorialization at work. So we have to be more expansive in our thought processes to help things better. There is a constant flow, to and fro exchanges happening between the nations and their transnational loci. Any other question?
Hi, sir. Shoykot here.
I would also be happy to take it. Yeah.
Hello, sir.
Shoykot, I was missing you. Yes, please go ahead.
Am I audible clearly?
Yes, yes, you're audible.
Okay, sir. My question would be the idea of cosmopolitanism and democracy. In this regard, I would be wanting to
Yeah,
refer
yeah,
to
yeah, yeah. I can hear you now. Yeah, please go ahead with your observation. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. I would be referring to Kant's essay on cosmopolitanism, and my
Yeah.
question would be that how much do you feel that the idea of
Okay.
intuition that Kant has talked about, right, that not only works in the paradigm of democracy,
Mhm.
but also in the paradigm of transnationalism?
Okay. Could you elaborate on what exactly you want to know about the intuition part?
Okay, by intuition, what I mean is that Kant says that in a democratic country or in a democratic world, so to say, you have to imagine about or think about those people who essentially do not resemble you. So how do you feel this would result in this idea of
Yeah, yeah.
conceiving a borderless world or this idea of transnationalism?
Okay, yeah, fine. Now, the point is that essentially breaks down the binarization in the very first place. Because as I had pointed out, that when you have the operation of hyphenated identities who no longer remain exclusively hyphenated, you see, there is a strong contestation to fight these hyphenated identities. There is a strong contest. There is a strong desire to expand the domain of cultural pluralism in multiple ways. So, yes, I would feel that, this would basically involve an acknowledgement of the fact as to what is going to be the workable reality of the present and the future. And once we do that, our ideas of cultural pollution, our ideas of cultural decadence would also be changing, and there wouldn't be competitive voices trying to jostle with each other. We will no longer have Rushdie and Amit Chaudhary involved in a debate between the Picador group and the Vintage group, finding about who has the voice of representation. All of these are important voices of representation. All of these, and that's why I mentioned that you can be a very exclusive community writer. You can write for an exclusive community. But once your work gets translated, once your work reaches a certain domain, it can have an entirely new possibility for an entirely new set of audiences. So let us understand that when we are referring to the old diasporic writers who have written certain works at some other point of time, these writers in their recent works, they are redoing their models, redoing their understanding, and this constant to and fro movement between these different homes are taking place. I wouldn't designate this as movement between countries only. I would designate this as movement between different homes. Meenakshi Mukherjee had left out Amitav Ghosh. Meenakshi Mukherjee did not challenge Amitav Ghosh. She challenged Vikram Chandra and Ardashir Vakil and Khilnani, Sohail Khilnani, for the idea of India, because they were diasporic writers. They were settled there. But mind you, Amitav Ghosh, for instance, has 3 residencies: Brooklyn, Calcutta, Kolkata, and Goa. And he's perennially shuttling between them. Even some of us do, though we don't have a foreign settlement abroad as yet, but I do. I have a home in Kolkata. I have a home in Durgapur. I have to go to Bankura. I'm shuttling between 3 places at the same time. And I feel I belong to all these 3 places inclusively and exclusively. So it's that sense of expandable horizons that we must accommodate in our psychological and political thinking of these terms. Thank you, Shrikant.
In this regard,
anything
sir,
else?
Yes, sir, there's another observation in this regard. You just
yeah.
You just talked about the idea of translation
please.
and opening up of new possibilities, right? Here I am reminded of a certain book that is the Prison Notebooks by Gramsci, that was translated by Noel Smith, if I am not wrong.
Gramsci.
Yes, Gramsci's Prison Notebooks, that was translated by Noel Smith.
And why?
I'm telling you, as you're telling that translation brings new possibilities, right? But if you go through the book of Noel Smith, they have paraphrased it so technically that the idea of the subaltern class or the people on the cringes of history
yes,
has
now
been completely debunked. So
I know.
Positive
I
possibilities or
know.
negative possibilities?
I know. See, no. That is not the problem of the book per se, and that is also not the problem of the language in which it was translated. That is the problem of the translator or the translators or the way of translation involved. That is a question that has to do with good translation and bad translation. You see, like I have read a book about a Bengali translation, a Bangla translation of The Namesake very recently. It's a dated book. I'm not going into that, but it's a horrendous translation. So just as you can have a bad translation of an English book into a language which is international, but which is, let's say, has a native base as well, it can be a good translation, it can be a bad translation. But then you have wonderful translators, like when Spivak was translating Maheshwata Devi, that was a good translation. The theoretical bases were also more pronounced. It helped take the regional and the local ethics and issues to a wider domain in the correct context. And now we don't have a problem in accommodating that in our sphere of study, like the English studies department that we have. Just yesterday, I'll just give you a very stray diversion as an example. One of my students was telling me that, sir, I want to do a PhD on cultural gerontology, which is one of the hotspots of my department. And he said that I have found out that it involves areas which are basically Western, Western textual context. I haven't found much of work of Indian, gerontological texts or a text having such gerontological or geriatric possibilities being worked on. I said, then you can start the trend and you can use theories which are both nativist as well as Western. That's up to you. So we have to be conscious about, coming out of these unnecessary academic and political compartmentalizations, which make life horrendous for all of us. And other than the fact that it helps release a couple of bad academic books. So that's the way I would see the whole thing. Anything else? Yeah.
No, sir. Thank you very much.
I have an observation from. I have a brief observation from Sharonna Ganguly. Yeah, I have a brief question from Sharonna Ganguly. She wants to know about resources from where we can understand transnational theory. Sharonna, let me point out to you that there is a plethora of resources on transnational theory. If you're just wanting to know about the theoretical part, let me point out to you that transnational theory is also part of political theories. You will find it in the domain of political science and international relationship. But when it comes to literature, you can refer to Transnationalism by Steven Vertovec. Steven Vertovec is a very important, critic on diaspora and new diasporas as we understand it. And if you are wanting to know about transnational literature with specific national connotations like transnational American literature, you can refer to the Cambridge Companions, the Palgrave Companions, and you will find wonderful information there as well. You can also, for the sake of a theoretical understanding, which is not only dry theory as we understand today. You see, basically, what has happened in the English departments today is, as I find it with many of my colleagues who are also very good friends, is that they have branched out so much into history, politics, and philosophy that they have left out the literary part completely. There are very few academics, I guarantee you that, who actually spend time on reading the multi-nuanced literary works that we have. I can give you an example about the writer of Exit West, the writer of The Reluctant Fundamentalist, Mohsin Hamid. I keep talking about him in many of my lectures. Mohsin Hamid talks about transnationalism in a very wonderful way by giving some examples, as I found out. And he talks about writers like Sara Suleri, Sara Suleri had a Welsh academic father and I think an Indian or a Pakistani mother. She faced some challenges abroad, but she dealt with it. Hopefully, you will find that in Meatless Days. And even some traditional writers. Let me give you an example like Ernest Hemingway. When I do American literature, I find Ernest Hemingway being referred to as an American writer. You know, Hemingway is traditionally referred to as an American writer. But have you ever thought about this, that there are novels like Farewell to Arms, which is based on Italy and Switzerland. There is For Whom the Bell Tolls, which is in Spain. Even the very canonical The Old Man and the Sea is based in the Caribbean. And this is the age of the memoirs. So you have A Movable Feast, which was based in Paris. So you have writings which are based in all these places which are non-American, and yet we just call him an American writer. You know, the way we call Saul Bellow a Jewish American writer. We have to remind the audience that he is not Christian. Mind you, he is Jewish, so treat him differently. This attitude has to go. This is the attitude that has to be relinquished. Okay, your gender, your nationality should not be, your caste, your class should not be the only domain of your judgment. Your content should be the domain of evaluation, positive or negative. Okay. Coming of age novels bearing the significance of transnationalism. Almost everything has something to do or the other with the idea of coming of age. Okay. Ardashir Vakil's Beach Boy is so interesting. Like, I happened to have this wonderful talk with Professor Krishna Sen during my MPhil Viva, that Beach Boy I found out to be a very wonderful work of art. You know, there is this boy who has this increasing tension about the surrounding world, about the understanding of the holistic world, and how to negotiate with the changes that are happening around him, especially when the contexts are different. Okay, and coming of age literally need not always be a Bildungsroman or a Kunstlerroman in that sense. I feel that for that matter, you know, when we are rising above the jingoistic nationalisms that we are talking about today, or the tribalistic movements that we are talking about today, everything has some bit of growth. Even if I begin with a character who is now 20-year-old, and gradually attains the age of 40, that is also a novel of transition. So even Moth Smoke is a novel of transition. Even Homeboys is a novel of transition. No Longer at Ease, I mentioned in the previous lecture of mine, where there is that going and coming motive, a circularity, a character going during his student days and coming back as a working adult. They have these tensions of transnationalism, but they also have a positive spirit of transnationalism. And in that sense, these are all what I call multi-territorialized Bildungsroman in that sense. Okay, so the Bildungsroman is also evolving. There is a very wide, and very strong mixture between the Bildungsroman and the Picaresque now. And that is leading to newer possibilities, especially when characters are on the run, literally, and in cyberspace, we are all migrating all the time. You find that as an important thematic content in most of the novels that are written today. So there is a diverse field. You know, once you start reading one or two of these works, the other works would automatically come in one by one. Anything else? No, I don't see any other question, any other observation, or any other criticism or critique. I'll be happy to accommodate that as well. Yeah. Sourav, I seem to stick to your time.
Okay, thank you very much. But before we move ahead to the second slot. I must say, what should I say? I have actually, I'm really very ashamed of the kind of question that was being posted in the chat box. I hope Subhadeep won't take it personally. Actually, these kind of web lecture series are all, but okay. These kind of web lecture series.
No. The thing is that is also part of the game, because most of the questions need not always be a lip service. I always remind that, I once wrote a particular critique on Sylvia Plath in the Statesman, and I had a heated epistolary exchange with one of my critics in the letters to the editor section. Like, he was writing back and I was writing back, and this continued for 6 or 7 days, before which finally this thing was tranquilized, let's put it that way. And let me also point out that Meenakshi Mukherjee, for whatever critique we are offering about her views today, Supriya Chaudhary has a wonderful review after Meenakshi Mukherjee died. And it's a kind of an obituary that we have, I think, in the Outlook magazine, where she said that it is because of the expansive vision that Meenakshi Mukherjee had, that she could even bring out the best from her critics, or from the people that she did not so convincingly believe in. So this is a workable relationship, and I always welcome that. And it's part of the game. So I welcome that question as well, Sourav. No need to feel bad at all.
Well, okay, thank you very much for your generosity. Now, I will request Ashim Kumar Betal, faculty member, Department of English, Onda Thana Mahavidyalaya, to host the second slot. Ashim sir, are you there? Hello?
Yes. I am.
Okay. Please host the second slot.
First of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Subhadeep Paul for his wonderful observations. Good afternoon to all of you. Now I would like to introduce Dr. Pinaki De, Associate Professor of Raja Peary Mohan College, Uttarpara. He will discuss today, which is a topic, and the topic is bookmaking and design, some milestones. Pinaki De is a multiple award-winning graphic illustrator, designer, who regularly works for renowned publishers like Penguin Random, HarperCollins, Hachette Routledge, Pema, Oxford University Press, Singapore University Press, Bloomsbury, Warrior Blackstone, World View, Pan Picoder, Simon and Schuster, Permanent Black, Alchemy Says, Raleigh, Sahitya Academy, and so on. His book cover for Kolkata by Kunal Bosu won the prestigious Oxford Bookstore Prize for the best cover design in India. His PhD in comics theory, he was awarded with PhD in comics theory. Pinaki is one of the editors of the prestigious annual magazine Long Form. He is the Indian comics advisor of Mangasia. There is sort of problem. Now I would like to introduce Dr. Pinaki De, and he is now going to address us in this topic. Dr. Pinaki De.
Pinaki, this is Subhadeep here. I'll be having to sign off. I welcome you to the post-noon session, and I'm one of your big fans. Telling the audience here to enjoy. Please carry on from here.
Can you hear me, Subhadeep?
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah, I can. I can hear you.
In the last 10 minutes of your lecture, so like Subhadeep and I go a long way back, so it's fantastic to hear you again, at least virtually after a long period.
Yeah.
That's not a problem, of course. I think
really, Pinaki, carry on. And Pinaki is also the illustrator of one of my books. Yeah, so thank you very much. Thank you, Sourav. Thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Okay, so I hope everybody can hear me clearly, and can you hear me? Okay, so before I begin, what I want to talk about is, of course, I have a presentation as well, and because without this, I think it will not work. So can I just, test my presentation, for 5 seconds to see that it works, and then begin my lecture. Will that be okay, Shura? What do you think?
Okay, okay.
Okay, fine. So let me get this shared thing up. So can you see my screen now? Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see
You
your
can.
screen.
Yeah. Can you see my screen?
Your enter screen once again.
So can you see my screen? I mean, that is what I'm trying to tell.
Is it a blank screen? Just white?
No, it is a white screen, but there is something
Yes.
in the middle. Can you see the picture now?
No.
No.
No, sir.
No,
Yeah, tell
no
me.
picture. Only the white screen.
Only the white screen? Then it's not working. Just a minute. Just a minute. No picture. So present now. Okay, let me do the entire screen. I think the entire screen is a better shot. I think, can you see it now? Can you see it
Yes,
now?
yes, yes, yes. We can see.
Can you see the picture now?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. So, let me stop sharing first, and then, of course, most of the time, the problem is you may not see me. You may actually see my presentation because it is actually very visual in nature. Um, uh, you know, um, uh, Somebody is presenting. Okay, how can some? I'm sorry. I mean, I think it's a mistake by somebody.
Yes,
Can you?
Paramita Bhai, please stop presenting.
You don't have to do anything. We will just. Yeah,
Yes.
that's fine. I think it's like a small mistake. So what I'm trying to tell is, of course, that what I'll be talking about is the history of book design. And when I talk about book design, of course, I'll be not talk about design per se, but about only some milestones which somehow, defines the way we look at books, right? I always consider books to be a kind of an artifact, although, the very fact that the book is an artifact is being now questioned by the arrival of ebooks and all that. But still, if you look at the evolution of the book as an artifact, I think you have a very interesting subject at hand. People really don't talk a lot about book design as something part of literary discourse, which I really regret. I wish to change that. So I intentionally, chose this subject. So what I'll try to do is to just, jog you through some most important milestones in book designs, and you'll be very, very surprised to see how those designs actually have an impact on the way bookmaking have evolved down the ages. Now, let me start the presentation as I hope you can see this now. Can you see my screen? I mean, just say a yes or no. I mean, I just want to know whether you can see my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Fine. So
It is visible.
wonderful. So I begin with a person who I credit to be the inventor of the modern book. Although we know, of course, the first book was, the typed book was, of course, first published in Germany, the Gutenberg Bible. Although there are many, probable situations that we haven't discussed that, but I'm not too concerned about the 15th century or the 14th century too much. Let me begin first with this man. The man that you see in the picture is, of course, Aldo Mano. I think this man has a contribution to Renaissance as much as the other great humanists. In fact, Aldo Mano is also known as Aldus Manutius the Elder. And if you ask me, he is one of the singular most important person in Renaissance humanism. Now, why do we don't read him? I absolutely don't know, because I think he's one of the few scholars and and bookmakers who have redefined the way we see a book. In fact, Manutius, of course, we are talking about the 16th century, the early 16th century. And if you look at the early 16th century, the whole bookmaking business was based in Venice. Although the movable type, as we all know from the Gutenberg press, was invented in mid 1400s in Germany, it is Venice which actually became the center of bookmaking processes that, in a way, mark the mark Renaissance humanism so much. In fact, according to the great Renaissance scholar, Vittore Branca, at the end of the 15th century, there are almost 150 typographers operating in Venice. Can you imagine that? 150 typographers. And the brightest of them is this man, Aldus Manutius. A lot of you may have wondered, why I started with Manutius. One of the reasons is all of you are also acquainted with the italics, right? With the typography variation you have, right? The itals or the italics. In fact, we can credit Manutius for the discovery of the italics. Okay, so before that, let me also tell you something else. So basically, Manutius was running a press which is called the Aldine Press. Aldus Manutius. So after him, it was called the Aldine Press. And Aldine Press was initially one of the pioneers who almost tried to recreate the handwriting in typography. So if you look at the early typography, although the handwriting was long form, written in a long form way, the typography was mostly in something called the littera antiqua and the black letter form. So it was very geometric, it was very scientific, but it didn't imitate the handwritten manuscript too much. So that feel of handwritten manuscript was almost vanishing with the spread of this kind of what I call staid typography. Okay, Manutius wanted to correct that. So what he thought of was he tried to publish the texts in original Greek and original Latin. Now, he was a pioneer in that. In fact, he published almost 30 to 35 texts in original Greek and original Latin. Let me show you some of them, because I think this is also something that people don't know too often. So it is good if I can show it to you. So just a moment, let me show you. So this is the Aldine Press. Can you see this? I hope you can see this. This is actually the logo of the Aldine Press. I hope you can see this. Can you see the mark here? So this is the logo, the anchor with a dolphin. That's the logo of the Aldine Press. And Aldine Press began to create what I call gems in bookmaking. If you look at, what happened was this man, Aldus Manutius, also commissioned a punch cutter. If you want to use metallic type, you need to cut punches. And he actually nominated, he actually chose a punch cutter called Francesco Griffo, and he wanted the punches to be done in such a way that it imitates the handwriting of the manuscripts, and that is the beginning of what I call the italics font. In fact, the italics, as you know today, of course, it comes from old, Latin engraving tombstones, and that is why, it's called italics. So italics today, as you know it, is actually the contribution of, Aldus Manutius and Griffo. I will show you some of the stuff which actually will explain my position in a better manner. So for example, let me show you this. This is one of the Greek texts. This is a Sophocles, play, which is, published by Aldine Press. But can you see something here? Here, the curve of the handwriting, of the curve of the hand is imitated in type. something we have never seen before. So whenever you want to imitate the handwriting, you cannot put handwriting in typography because it would not be even. But what you can see today is that the type itself is, placed in such a way, the angle at which the type and the punch is made, that it actually, in a way, creates the illusion of an angle, illusion of the hand writing on the paper. So I personally think this is a great innovation, one of the greatest milestone in bookmaking history. If you actually look at the contribution of Aldine Press more and more, you will be sure that there are more contributions. But one story I want to talk about is that of Erasmus. In fact, Erasmus was so influenced by Manutius that he actually walked under Manutius for a long period of time. And one of his greatest work, Iphigenia in Auli, was actually published by the Aldine Press. He actually chased Manutius in order to get that book published the way he wanted. Now, what are the innovations that Manutius actually did? I will show you another work by Manutius, and this will actually make it very, very interesting. So this was shown earlier. Okay, so this is again a text by Manutius. I hope you can see this. So first of all, what are the innovations that Manutius brought in bookmaking culture? First of all, he is the inventor of the pocket-sized book. Very few people, if you look at the entire thing, very few people, used to carry the books, with them. So in order to make the people carry the books with them, Manutius devised a book of smaller dimension. So the pocket-sized book that you see was entirely Manutius's invention. And this actually led to the popularity of book as something that can be carried around, especially say the religious books or books of quotations, the commonplace books, that was so frequent in Renaissance, that can be carried around, for frequent reference outside the library or the monastery or the house or outside the study of your own house. So, books became more accessible, and that's a very, very important thing, because earlier in the initial phase of printed books, books were regarded as something so precious that you may not always carry it to the place that you go. That's number one. In fact, there is a beautiful quote by Manutius. Of course, that's in Latin, but if you translate it in English, I wish to sweep away barbarism with books. And I think how true he is, he sounds very true even today. Next, of course, he also introduced in some of his books a more regular pagination, page number. Earlier, most of the books had no page number. Of course, if you look at the illustrated books, they had practically no page numbers. And then, of course, you actually find that typed books and books and movable type, even they don't have page numbers. So Manutius is actually paying attention to that. Next, of course, he's the first to adopt a more regular punctuation. So you can see I'm actually talking of a giant and nobody knows about him. I rarely find anybody discussing about Manutius while talking about Renaissance. He's the first to adopt comma. Okay, so the comma, the punctuation mark comma that you see was, Manutius's contribution. And of course, the giving period after every sentence, of course, it was there, but Manutius Aldus Manutius regularized it. He actually used apostrophe, accent, semicolon for the first time. So, the regular punctuation. So you can easily guess that this is something that he, took a lot of care, while doing. And last, of course, there are many more, but the last point that I want to make is, of course, the use of preface. Earlier, the books used to start bang on, so you have the text and bang, it starts. It's not like that in case of Manutius. What happens? He uses preface, first of all, and in the preface, he discusses his editorial work. He would also actively engage the reader. And this is done for the first time. He would urge the reader to find errors if there are any. So you can see, he's trying to build a bridge with the reader through the artifact that he is making, the book, the very idea of the book. And who knows, I think the most important thing about Renaissance is, of course, the history of printing in Renaissance, the way knowledge is disseminated in the Renaissance. So if you don't know the way knowledge is disseminated in Renaissance, I think one part of Renaissance culture will always be a dark tunnel to you. So, this is what I want to talk about about Aldus Manutius. And next milestone I want to talk about, and for that I go to England, and of course, and I go to England, and I go to a very interesting, part of English printing history, and it is from I would say 19th century. So let's go straight to the 19th century, and here we can see another milestone coming up. There are many more in between, but since I'll be talking selectively about certain things which I feel is very interesting to look at, I'll be a bit random in here. So this is actually the logo of the Chiswick Press. Most of you haven't heard of it, but Chiswick Press was actually the collaboration of two printers, Charles Whittingham and a publisher called William Pickering. Now, Pickering is a giant in publishing. They together actually, believed in revivalism. So they began to revive a lot of things that were there earlier. One of the things that they revived is, use of old type. Okay, so there was a foundry called the Caslon Foundry, and here for the first time, so this is the Caslon Foundry. And if you look at the Caslon Foundry, and I'll just, so this is a kind of a variation of the Caslon Foundry. For the first time in a book, Caslon, the type is used. And that is a huge step, because afterwards, whatever came up, Caslon became one of the most important classic typeface for a book. In fact, one of the book I want to show you, and I'm actually showing it, is actually the diary of Lady Willoughby. And this is, of course, you can see the date. It is, it was a revival. So it was published in the year 1844. Don't look at this date. This is a misnomer. This is actually part from the novel. But the date is basically if you look at this, it's 1844, 19th century. I was talking of 19th century. And since this date is important, because, what you are seeing is a proper layout of a page. So can you see? So there is an illustration. This is called a headpiece. There is a title. So the title comes either up the headpiece or, below the headpiece. It depends. Here it is up the headpiece. You have something called the grid. And within the grid, you have a drop cap. The drop cap is in old, type. You have the body text set in Caslon. You have use of italics in order to accentuate things. And you have what I called marginalia as well. So you actually see the grid of a book being laid out. So it was done earlier, but it was not done this geometrically. So I personally feel Chiswick Press to be a great innovator in the way a book is laid out. And so one of the most interesting thing is the Chiswick Press. I will give you the sample of, this is the Caslon type. So if you can look at it, this is the Caslon type, William Caslon type. And these are the variations. And, all the type that you see, these are, remember, type with a bit of, decorative element at the back is known as the serif font. So all the serif font that you see, the Garamond, the Times New Roman are actually Caslon derivatives. So, the whole use of Caslon becomes very, very important in this context. So let me show you more the one text that I think is pressed by, published by the Chiswick Press that redefined layout. This is, of course, one of the Book of Common Prayer. This is the Book of Common Prayer, one of the greatest bestseller ever. And if you look at it, you can see the name of the publisher, William Pickering, 1844. And for the first time, you have a color variation in type, right? So you have actually another color being added in type. There were many interesting decorations. The engravings actually are done by a lady called Mary Byfield, who is again a great pioneer. And if you look at the way this is being actually, developed, this is fantastic. I find this to be one of the most beautiful looking books of all time. This is the first page of the book of, Common Prayers, published by the Chiswick Press. And look at the use of the old, typeface, old English typeface. There are so many variations of the front page itself. So no front page is almost same. So there are so many front page that are actually there. You can feel that he's actually making variations of the same book again and again. So I personally feel that, Pickering is somebody whom we should actually look at very, very closely. Look at the inside page of the Common Prayer book. Again, a beautiful, look at the variation of the typeface. So for example, you have a proper Caslon typeface, and then in order to put something, quotational within it, you use something else. You use a different kind of a typeface in order to accentuate it. So the mixture of typefaces that you see today, which is like a common feature in the book, it was actually something that was used by William Pickering, a lot of times. Let me also show you other variations. So there are so many. There are 40 odd variations. I have every one of them. I can just lose myself showing all this, but these are beautiful, things to look at. Okay. So this is the book of the Common Prayer. So you can see, there are color variations as well. So there are many editions of the same book. So there is a silver edition, the gold edition, the premium edition. So the idea of making editions of the same book is also something that the Chiswick Press was thinking about, probably keeping in different kind of audience in mind. Okay. So this is something very, very interesting. Let me also show you the greatest creation of the Pickering Press. And this is something you should look at. I don't think they make books like this anymore. And the book that I'm talking about is The Elements of Euclid. It is done by Oliver Bryan. And this book, I think, is just amazing to look at. It was originally published by Pickering. This is one of the scans I have of the reprinted book, which is published by Taschen. But what is there inside the book is amazing. So you can see this was published in 1847 by William Pickering. This is a Chiswick Press. And for the first time, in order to make you understand Euclid, you have different, color, used, to actually make you understand different kind of geometric spaces. So, this is the first 6 books of Euclid. And if you look at the book making, I think this is fascinating. Look at the combination of the typefaces. Look at the way the angles are illustrated. Look, you have to understand one thing. This is done, very, very early. This is not done anymore. So if you look at the date, I am talking of 1847, mid 19th century, and you have this. So let me show you a bit more closer scan. I think this is better. So look at this, for example. Look at the way every square has got a color in order to illustrate something. So I personally regard Pickering, who I think is a revivalist, to be, one of the most important innovator in bookmaking. The way he uses color is very, very exciting. Of course, we can also talk of the great. Next one is something that of course, this is William Blake. So the third milestone I'm talking about, again, these are very random milestones. There are many more, of course. I can talk about 200 milestones in bookmaking processes. I can write 4 or 5 books on it. But the whole thing is to introduce you to this thing. I think otherwise, I think this will always remain a dark area for all of you. This is something that you all know. Songs of Innocence and Experience by William Blake. William Blake, as you all know, is an engraver. We all know this. But what we don't know is that how engraving itself is part of his own discourse as a poet. I'll just give you 1 or 2 examples. For example, what do you do in engraving? You make a copper plate, and when you make a copper plate, you actually try to engrave the copper plate with the drawings that you are doing. And on that copper plate, you actually pour you actually do the engraving on that copper plate by fire, by help of fire. It's almost a process akin, which reminded you of the mythical way, Moses received the New Testaments, something that, the Moses receiving the Old Testament, the Ten Commandments, which was actually written on fire, written by fire. Remember the very image of God writing the in fire on the tablet is one of the most defining, image in Old Testament. So the very idea of 10 commandments. So remember, Blake himself viewed himself as a prophet, almost Moses-like. He carves out, things from within the engraved plate. And within the engraved plate, you would actually put on color and actually, print the color on the page itself. So the very act of, engraving by fire and then putting color and then engraving it ensured that every book that he printed is unique, is different, because no color will be same, because the plate is same, but the colors that you give will always be different. So there are so many variations of what is called the illuminated book of Blake that there is no singular version of it. In fact, if you go to one of the biggest website, William Blake Archives, you will see so many variations where the colors differ a bit here and there. It is not the same in all the places, in all the texts. What I want to tell here is, of course, bookmaking as something ingrained within the idea of writing itself. You are also rewriting, okay, when you are making the book itself. Blake actually, first of all, wrote within the engraved. Of course, he wrote it in his mind, and of course, he may have written it in a piece of paper. The drafts are not seen anymore. We don't know. We have lost Blake's draft, and then, of course, he would rewrite them within the engraved plate. So this very fact of rewriting everything on the engraved plate is something that is fascinating. In fact, Blake is the pioneer of what we call the artist's book today. I can show you many artist's book if I have the time. But what I wanted to tell you here is that Blake, and these are all very well-known stuff to you. Blake was against industrial mass production. Okay, he was against that. So he hated the old idea of printing, where many books can be printed. So that mass dissemination was something that he didn't like. So he actually created his unique book. Every book that he created was unique, and he can only do it through a kind of a mechanical process that is very personal in nature. So engraving as such became his own personal conduit to the world of creativity. So, of course, you can talk about Blake a lot. I'm a huge fan of William Blake. We can go on talking, but let us again move on to another milestone, because we don't have too much time. I don't have too much time. Let me go to Europe, for example. And one of the books that I want to show is, this book. I hope you can see this book. This is called, this is the book, The Gentle Art of Making Enemies. And this book is actually by a man called James McNeill Whistler. If you see the inside of the book, you will know why it is so different. James McNeill Whistler is an artist, and he is for the first time looking at recreating marked, marks as prints. So these are normal pencil marks. These are coming as prints. He's one of the pioneers. There are, of course, many other books which did it, but nobody did it like Neil Whistler. And this was actually, done in the year 1890, so late 19th century. And this actually created a kind of, so let me show you some of another Whistler book. Whistler is also, doing very conventional stuff, but he's also playing with space. So you can easily understand that he's an innovator in that sense. But this actually, created a lot of innovation, especially in the French publishing scene. And here, the poets got actively involved. This is an English translation. I have got the French as well, but since most of you would not know French, so what I've done is I have actually put the English version here. This is Mallarme, Stephen Mallarme's poem, amazing poem, one of the best poems I have read. I think 1897 poem, around that. Yes, I think 1897. I'm just quoting from memory. The poem is, of course, called "The Throw of Dice Will Never Abolish Chance." A throw of dice would never abolish chance. So, in order to talk about chance and fatality and the randomness of the dice, he actually created this poem. Of course, this kind of poem is not so, unique. You can see, this kind of pictograms created by George Herbert, for example. Herbert. Later, of course, Apollinaire will create, Guillaume Apollinaire, the French symbolist poet, will again create amazing text called calligrams. I don't know whether I have calligrams. I can show you calligrams. I think I have it. Yes, so I can show you calligrams. So this is a calligram. So, since something is about rain, the whole text is created like a rain. So if you're actually talking about the Eiffel Tower, the entire text is created like the Eiffel Tower. You can understand how difficult it is to translate these stuff. But what I'm trying to say is, Mallarme is a unique personality because he, for the first time, consciously does it and consciously takes interest in making the book like that. He employs an artist to do it, and he was very, very sure of where to place the texts, in the space where it should go, the way it should be explored. I'm very, very interested, because later on there is a very interesting experiment that took place. This is a new book by Marcel Bourthiers. Bourthiers is a Belgian bookmaker, and he pays tribute to Mallarme. He just puts black marks over Mallarme's poem and shows how beautiful Mallarme has actually created, spatiality, what is called, white space, the space to write and space to leave. Because remember, what is more important is the space that you leave rather than the space that you write. Every creation actually takes heed of this more than anything else. So I think this is again a very, very innovative thing. And this is actually something I have done. I have overlaid Mallarme's poem with a kind of a translucent paper with Bourthier's new book. Bourthier's new book was, of course, published in the 20th century, and it was published much, much later, 1969. But what I've done is to show how space can be manipulated in the page in order to talk about a book itself. I think I have very little time. Sourav, I think we should, do you want me to continue, or, because I think the time is not much. Okay, let me go on to tell you something more, maybe 10 more minutes. Very interesting bookmaking, of course. I'll just end with one example, and this is
Yes, sir, continue.
Huh? Tell me.
Continue, sir. Continue.
Okay, so I will do two things. And I'll end the lecture. So give me 10 minutes. So again, another very interesting bookmaking is something that we see in 1968. This is, of course, the great book by Marshall McLuhan. You all know this book. The medium is the message. A must study. But here the design is by a person called Quentin Fiore, and Fiore actually uses visuality as an index of textuality. So here you actually can see, look at the way he has actually used this. The book is an extension of the eye. So the book itself, the vision of the eye staring at you becomes the text itself, and the text actually refers back to the picture. So Quentin Fiore, I think the book of Marshall McLuhan, The Medium of the Message, is probably another great milestone that we can look at. This is again another from Quentin Fiore. Look at the way, the visual iconography is used in order to create a textuality of its own. Here, the very idea of textuality and visuality overlaps each other, and it creates a kind of a continuum from which it is very difficult to extricate one from the other. So what I'm trying to say is that this is extremely interesting, and because it is not only bookmaking for decorative purposes, but it is bookmaking as what I call as a creative enterprise, as something that talk about the text. Look at this. Technically, we are beyond survival, and you have only 2 exclamation marks. And that's the book. That's how the entire book is done. I can show you many. So this is a chapter called You, and look at the way, the concentric circles has been used as a kind of a motive that actually, reflects back on the text that is written on the right-hand side. I think this is a great innovation. Another innovation, great innovator, another milestone I want to talk about is that of Richard Eckersley. Now, Richard Eckersley is a great designer, but one of his greatest design is that of Jacques Derrida's Glass. If you know Jacques Derrida's Glass, and I think many of you have read Glass, Glass is a very interesting text. Here, Derrida wanted a bookmaker to do it. So you have the left-hand side and the right-hand side, then both the texts are different from each other. So on the left-hand side, you have text by Hegel, and on the right-hand side, you have actually a text by Jean Genet. If you are very interested to know which text, of course, the text is very, very long, but I remembered it by heart. It's what remains of a Rembrandt torn into from equal, what remains of Rembrandt when it is torn from equal pieces and flushed down the toilet. This is a very surreal text in a way by Jean Genet, and he is actually putting the text by Genet on the right-hand column and the text on Hegel on the on the left-hand column. And these texts, sometimes they overlap each other, they fuse together. I'll show you. So, sometimes they fuse together, and look at the way sometimes, esoteric Tibetan writing, makes a kind of an appearance in Derrida's text. What I'm trying to say is, that these two columns, in a way, if you look at it, of course, the linearity of an average book would not work in a text like that of Derrida's. And so what happens is the medium becomes the message itself. So, what happens was, I'll just tell you, both the columns actually resist each other. So it becomes a kind of a futuristic text, because there is a larger question of how to read the two main columns of print. The left-hand column is a commentary, or whether it's an exposition, or in Derrida's own word, whether it's a violent decipherment of the philosophy of Hegel, while the right-hand column of the similar maltreatment of a great playwright actually breaks down the very idea of text as it being quoted, frequently, texts as quotation. So, what I'm trying to say is that, if it was just done in ordinary typeface, in an ordinary layout, the very idea of Derrida's Glass would have been defeated. No academic institution touches Glass, and I'll tell you why, because they're too afraid to deal with this kind of visuality. Glass is a later work of Derrida, and I've never found any academic actually mentioning this. But this is such a wonderful work, and if you look at this is actually something that is seen earlier. This is Talmud. Can you see? So if you can see the right-hand part, this is Talmud. The old Talmud. The old Talmud had that kind of text. Derrida is just imitating the idea of Talmud in a more postmodern, context. So that is one thing I wanted to show you. And the last one, where I actually end my fascinating lecture, is my favorite, with a favorite writer. Of course, this is James Joyce's Ulysses. You all know Ulysses. It's my favorite book. I've read it so many times, and it's a book that I go back whenever I feel a bit depressed. But what is fascinating that you can actually decipher, read the entire Ulysses by just looking at the way the cover of the Ulysses, evolved. This is the first version of Ulysses, simple cover. But what is interesting is Ulysses got a very, very exciting cover, and I don't know whether you know this. This is a cover which was commissioned by George Massey. George Massey actually, gave $5,000 to a great artist called, him, Matisse, Henri Matisse, and wanted him to do the cover of Ulysses as well as to do illustrations within Ulysses. James Joyce was very, very excited, but as happened, Matisse never read Ulysses. He thought that the Ulysses is actually a mythical figure just based on mythology, nothing else. So he lost the contemporary context. And this is the cover he actually came up with. It's basically a kind of an engraved cover. Of course, there is a kind of a reference to time here. But what is interesting is the illustration. That he actually made 6 illustrations. There are 2 drafts. So these are the illustrations that he actually created. So these are the illustrations that he created from Ulysses. These are Matisse's illustration of Ulysses, and James Joyce was furious because for him, this was not what he intended to write. But, this is a very curious context. But, what happened was later, when in America, Ulysses was published, as you know, it won a great battle. This was a design which was done by Ernest Rayl, and this is a 34 version of Ulysses. So if you can look at it, it's a beautiful design where it actually tries to imitate the architectural space of Dublin itself, the square spaces of Dublin itself. The red block, which actually contains the writer's name, James Joyce, that writer name is also in a very modernist typeface by Paul Rayner. It's called Futura, which is used frequently now. And so what I'm trying to tell is Ernest Rayl completely reimagined the book. He made the book a kind of a repository. He made the book, he made the design of the book indicative of the content itself. Of course, Rayl's designs inside is very, very interesting. So for example, this is a page. So this is, can you see the drop cap? The entire drop cap in one page. So this is the beginning. Can you see stately plump buck mulligan? So, since the word stately is very big, okay? So, naturally, the S actually took on a very big shape. It almost occupies, it almost sweeps up the entire page. So look at this. This is Rayl's inside design. I'm fascinated by that book. I have this book, in real with me. And if you see it in real, this is much better. Next, of course, let us look at the next design. This is by, McKnight Coffer. This is a 49 design. And here you can see the way, again, U and L is played around, because of course, this is if you divide Ulysses by syllable, U-li-sis. So, actually it somehow tries to create that sound. It may also be, it also creates a kind of a pathway that, the circuitous pathway that the bloom that, travels within Dublin. There are many other aspects which I think we cannot tell right now. Maybe anybody who is interested can ask me later. But what is very, very interesting is a new design I want to show you. This is by Peter Mendelssohn, and I'll just read out the last lines of Ulysses and say how good this design is. So, the last line of Ulysses goes like this, and I have with me the book, so I'm just reading from there. He kissed me under the Moorish wall, and I thought well him as another. Then he asked me, would I yes to say yes? My mountain flowered and first put my arms around him, yes. And drew him down to me so that he could feel my breasts all perform, yes. And his heart was going like mad, and yes, I said, yes, I will, yes. So, Mendelssohn does something very interesting. He completely does away with any kind of pictures. He just, uses the word Ulysses to create the yes from within. The entire Ulysses is built along this very idea of yesness. And, so this is where, you can see cover design almost imitating or almost creating a subtext in itself. This work, in a way, this very cover, probably focuses on the use of language within the text. So when you look at the cover, you may not understand what is there in the cover until you read the end of the book. And it actually also ties up the book in a nice circle. So as you end the book with a great yes, the last word of the book is yes, you again come back at the cover and you discover the yes scrawled in black. So, this is something I find fascinating. What I'm trying to say is, I'm sorry, I'm just stop sharing. I hope to see you again, because this is something that I wanted to talk about. I'm not sure whether this will interest you. This is an academic seminar. I'm not an academic as such, although I teach somewhere. But, what I'm trying to tell is that please pay attention to these things, because if you don't pay attention to these things, bookmaking, book as an artifact, we all talk about book as an artifact, and we are losing book as an artifact. We are not paying attention to the materiality of book itself. The very idea of materiality is such an important concern for every writer. As somebody scratches a pen on paper, the very idea of hearing the noise of the scratches on pen or paper or a tablet on a screen, that very sound, the very birth of creativity is actually inscribed on a kind of materiality. It may be a tab, it may be a Kindle, it can be a book, but you cannot deny the very materiality of the medium through which you are actually conveying your very abstract thoughts. So what I'm trying to say is that, please, whenever you read a text, and I was hearing a bit of Amritda's text as well, and there is such a wonderful, subtext of, Gulliver's text, Gulliver Travels printing history, book history. I can tell you one thing. For example, if you can just study Lolita through the covers, I have in my collection almost 100 odd covers of Lolita. You can read the text itself because it's a story in itself. Okay. Blake, of course, Blake is unique in this sense because he's actually trying to point out that very materiality. Very few authors does it, but Blake tries to do it. Kingsley Amis does it. A lot of postmodern writers does it, but it is very, very exciting to know that things are changing now. People are paying more attention to this, and I hope someday there will be some. Look at the Indian books, for example. Look at the Indian books. Rabindranath himself pays so much attention to the way he writes. Have you seen his manuscripts? The manuscripts, the way he actually creates that subtext in itself. Look, he's of course thinking, but as he's thinking, as he's cancelling out one line after another, the very rigor with which he's doing it, and then creating something out of that, right? Something different out of that. His painted words are so fascinating. He is somebody whom we need to look at. Look at his manuscripts. You go to one of the sites we have made from Jadavpur University, Bichitra, which contains all his manuscripts, all his reworkings. And if you go to the Bichitra site, you will see how even those, drawings which you dismiss as doodles have evolved. So there are, so for example, a text like, if you look at a text like a very common text, for example, like Mohua, okay, a collection of poems that he actually did how many kind of doodles? How many? Amazing, almost 20 times. He's just writing and rewriting, he's painting and scribbling and cancelling, revisioning in order to create. But what he's trying to point out, what is the very idea of cancelling something with a black ink in order to build something unique is also pointing out to the very, very, very nature of the materiality of the book, of the artifact which he's also creating. He's creating words, he's creating things with language, but it is also done in a kind of a material plane, which you shouldn't forget. Okay, so that is it. I mean, this is a very short presentation, but I think it is a kind of an introduction. It is not, I'm not being, too comprehensive as well. I hope you like it. I don't know. I mean, this is a bit of a different thing that you may hear. So that's it. I thank Sourav a lot because Sourav, was he insisted on, doing something on book design, which I thought was a nice thought. Otherwise, webinars, I have very little, what I call endurance for webinars. I'm sorry, but you are doing a wonderful job. Nothing against it. I think more webinars should take place. More webinars. So any questions? So if you have any questions, I've already taken a lot of time. So any questions? I'm ready.
Pinaki, may I?
Yes, tell me. Oh, hi. How are you?
Hi, Pinaki. I'm fine. I'm doing good. Actually, it was a mind-boggling session as usual. It's not a surprise to me. Pinaki, I was just wondering when you're going through the last part of your session, and by this time I was also reading Jhumpa Lahiri's text called "The Clothing of Book," and I have and I have this piece, and I would like your reaction, your response to it. because I feel like there's a sort of triad, where we have the text on one hand, then we have the cover design and his designer on the other end, and on the other end we have the writer. And as you pointed out about Matisse and the writer regarding Ulysses, there was a tension. Similarly, I find Lahiri, mentioning, I quote, "What is the perfect book jacket? It doesn't exist. The great majority of covers, like our clothes, don't last forever. They
Wonderful.
make sense, give pleasure in only a specific arc of time." So how would you react to this? And in fact, even she says, I think this anxiety also occurs because of his own cultural, anxiety. So she says the only part left intact is the original text in the language in which it was written.
I know. I've read this because since it is part of my study, of course, of book design, I'm actually writing a book on book design, mostly Indian book design. But I've read Jhumpa Lahiri's text. In fact, I've talked with her also regarding this. We exchanged some emails. What I really like about, of course, she is looking at it from a slightly different kind of actually she comes from a very Renaissance kind of thought, so that is why
that was a domain.
That's a domain, and that's why she thinks of the clothing of the book, something that is not permanent, and it's something that is changeable, but what is left is only the writing, nothing else. In fact, it's very interesting to know that when Rabindranath was first published, there was no cover. The first Sharat Chandra book had no cover, right? So what does a cover, denote? So, I actually wrote back to Jhumpa Lahiri. In fact, I was supposed to do one of, I did one of his covers in US edition. And, he wrote, this is my angle. So even if there is a no cover, if say there is no cover, it doesn't matter. Even a white cover may be enough for a person who wants to read. And I differed and I said, look, you are looking at cover as a decorative clothing, it's something that is external. I look at cover more like I look at the Ulysses thing by Mendelssohn. And if I hope she just writes another, repost to what she has written. And in my book, I've criticized her squarely because I think a good cover is only that cover. There is no great cover, not the greatest cover ever. There is nothing like that. But what is a good cover? A good cover is what the book is all about. It's like a quotation. It's the first seduction, and it's the first seduction that the reader has with the book, with the very materiality of the book. So when you actually keep the book in your hand, so if there is a cover, one part of the book is missing. It's like you actually take a book without. It's a kind of a deformed book, right? So we normally call it.
Sometimes we just fall in love with the cover and we buy it. We don't even know the content of it.
But I can also understand from where Jhumpa Lahiri is coming from. This kind of Renaissance schooling is also there. I work a lot with Kunal Basu and Shoikat and Arvind Dadiga. Many of them, Kunal, for example, has a great liking for cover, but Shoikat has, but many others don't have. And they say that anything goes. I don't care what you put in. And so when I actually go through the text and tries to make the cover a kind of a subtext in itself, they say that why are you putting such an effort? Because ultimately what matters is the text that I have written. Your cover doesn't matter except for a few seconds. And I say it matters because, and I cite the example of Ulysses, and I tell it matters because it creates another story arc. It takes off from your story arc. I understand it's like a surrogate to you, but that doesn't mean the surrogates don't have a place in the world. The surrogates, everyone. So that is what I'm trying to tell. But Jhumpa's book is very interesting. I think I should credit her because she is one of the first writers to write about cover. Look at Virginia Woolf, for example. Her sister, Vanessa Bell, actually designed her cover. And unless she designed, nothing from Hogarth Press went. So, that's again a great, fascinating collaboration. So I can, Murakami, for example, Murakami doesn't do any cover without, Chip Kid. So a Chip Kid cover is as important as a Murakami book. In fact, Murakami tells that, my book starts from the cover done by Chip Kid. It is not from the first sentence that I write. It is the sentence that Chip Kid designs from where the text starts. So, there are, of course, I admire Jhumpa for all his writing, but you don't have to agree with everything that she writes. But, of course, I admire her as a writer. Yeah,
We'll be waiting
I
for your
want to add
perspective.
to the
We'll be waiting.
question.
yeah,
I
yeah,
want
I'll
to
be
add
writing.
to the question.
Tell me. Saurabh, am I taking
Hello.
too much time? I'm sorry, I'm
No,
breaking
no.
the. Yeah, tell me.
Pinaki.
Hello. Okay.
Hello, Pinaki.
Yes.
Okay.
This is Sharbani and I want to add to my student's
Oh,
question.
Sharbani, tell me.
Hello. What I
Ah,
want to ask you, because you yourself are a very active and prominent cover designer, book cover maker, should I say?
yes.
Do you think that the role of the cover designer is a kind of a second creation, a
Yes.
transcreation of the
Yes.
book, which may
Yes.
be interpreted not like the book but differently?
Yes, I think so because I think so, but it of course starts with the book, but it can branch out to different things. The problem is the way covers are done today. You know, in a book, in a market which is guided by commerce and all that, cover making, cover design. I'm not talking about cover designing. Cover making is a lost art. Most of the people who does cover don't read the text. So if you don't read the text, you will be left with a very bland cover. You will just be putting up one picture or the other. So there may be a very good looking
Yes,
picture,
exactly.
a great painting that may be put in the cover. But if it doesn't talk to the text inside, I don't think you have created something amazing. So unless you create something amazing, unless you create something different from what, of course you start off from the text, but it's not necessary that you stick to the text. So you take off from the text, and as Sharbani, as you rightly point out, it should be a kind of a new kind of a story. A story which takes its birth from the writings of the author, but it branches on to take on a kind of a life of its own. So every cover has its own story. I was talking with one of the persons I admire as a cover designer, of course, is Satyajit Ray. And whenever I see the Ekon covers, I was talking with Soumitra Chatterjee the other day. He was one of the editors of Ekon along with Nirmalandu Acharya, who has died. And I asked Soumitra why, what did he do? He said, look, Ekon got an identity due to the covers made by Satyajit Ray. But look what he did. He actually took the title of Ekon and put it in different styles. Now, what happens was, is actually talked about Ekon more profoundly than we did within the writings. So by the sketches of Ekon, which imitated sometimes Baroque art, sometimes Alpuna, sometimes something different, Satyajit Ray created something of a subtext. In fact, if you read Ekon together, I have all the 36 Ekons, they create a story in itself. In fact, the story of Ray's cover in Ekon can be a book, can be a book. That can be a book in itself. One day maybe I'll talk only about the Ekon cover, because I personally feel all the Ekon cover is a tribute to every art movement that Ray admired. So he imitated William Morris in one cover, and then he again imitated something like a Shantiniketan Alpuna in another cover. If one cover is a tribute to the Bohas tradition, another cover went back to to pay a tribute to somebody like Vinod Bihari, who was his guru in Shantiniketan. So what I'm trying to tell is that, of course, cover designing blandly will not do. If you are intelligent enough to read the book and take things from there, it is only then that cover making can be something very, very exciting and a story in itself, a kind of a creative enterprise in itself. So that is what I'm more interested in. Thank you, Sharbani, for being there.
I have watched, yes, because I have watched your covers of Kunal's novels,
Yes.
and I also listened into your wonderful lecture on Satyajit Ray's covers and the Bohas tradition.
Oh, thank
so,
you,
all that
Sharbani.
was coming back.
Yes, because for Kunalda's Calcutta, I had 14 variations. Nobody has seen them. So you have just seen one cover. We had 14 variations. So most of the covers I normally do 6 to 7 variations. You only see one.
Yes. You need to publish a book on that, your multiple covers.
Yes.
Maybe one day, maybe my unpublished covers. Yes. And I don't use them. I don't reuse them. I just keep it. I never reuse anything that has been created for one book. So every book has its own variations. No reusing, no recycling at all, ever. I haven't done it ever. Anything else? I mean, I don't know.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hello,
Yes.
sir.
Yes.
Am I
Yes.
audible, sir?
Yes. You are.
Yes, sir. Sir, it was a wonderful lecture. I'm a Bhavya, and
Okay. Hi.
I just wanted to, yeah, sir. Hello, sir. I just wanted to know about somewhere in her book, The Clothing of the Books,
Yes.
Jhumpa Lahiri talks about the mystery of the naked books. So,
Yes.
what does this mean? What is a naked
Uh,
book? A book
uh,
without a cover is a naked book.
that is what she tells, but she
Yeah.
may also imply at the very idea of language being constitutive of the book. So she's not
Okay.
actually what she's trying to tell is sometimes, that is something very confusing in her. Sometimes she talks purely
Okay.
the text as pure language. Okay. Sometimes he actually talks about text as it is written on, or as it is printed on paper. So naked book for him, it may be only language. Okay.
Okay.
So
Okay.
just as text, or it may be just the book without the cover. Okay. So a book,
Okay.
taken away the clothing is taken away, and you just get the cover, nothing else. Right.
Okay.
So
Okay.
and he says that there is a mystery in it, because when one you put that's another way of looking at it. So once you actually look at the cover, you try
Yes,
to
sir.
compartmentalize it, because you want to pin it down, you want to pin the book to certain image,
Okay.
you want to pin the
Yeah.
book to certain symbols, you want to pin the book to a certain vision, right? But that is what she says. So the mystery of a naked book is more interesting, because you don't have any compulsion to pin anything down. It is like an
Okay.
open territory, you can interpret whatever you like without the cover. So the absence of the cover becomes a kind of a metaphor for
Okay.
the primacy of the text itself. I think Jhumpa
Okay.
is coming from a very Renaissance point of view, where the
Yeah.
primacy of text takes off as a more important attribute. But if we look at the Renaissance texts, we forget that, because the way Renaissance has been disseminated, it has been seen, as a painting and textuality are very different kind of knowledge branches, and they exist separate. So maybe a Vasari can write about painters, but he has to write only in type, a kind of a printed place. So Michelangelo wrote a lot of sonnets that's not ever seen. We only see the Sistine Chapel of Michelangelo. The only person who
Yeah.
get that crossover done is Leonardo da Vinci, and his notebooks,
Yeah.
where you can see both the text and the painting existing side by side. But very few people know that the very idea of Renaissance is built on canon making, on the way printed books
Yeah. Yeah.
disseminated knowledge to the furthest corner. I think that's the singular most important contribution of Renaissance. Otherwise,
Yeah.
Renaissance is not always a great period that we celebrate. Renaissance was an extremely patriarchal period. Can you
Yeah.
get me the name of one Renaissance woman writer? You cannot, probably. You cannot.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly not. Yes.
Most of the time, colonialism takes its root. It's a very dark period. We have been taught lies by the Western countries that Renaissance is always but one of the greatest, if there's even one contribution that is very positive about Renaissance, is the way knowledge has been disseminated, and the way it has been disseminated through books,
Yes.
through materiality. And this is something that I personally feel in it. Canon making, I think, book making. I think Swapun Chakraborty has a wonderful essay on this, about the continuity of Renaissance. The very idea of Renaissance culture was based on the written word, not the
Okay.
spoken word. That written
Okay.
word became one of the most important metaphors for the Renaissance culture.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, thank you. But I think, Sourav, have I completely smashed the time barrier? I think I have.
Yes, yes, of course. Now we are at the end of this session. So I would request Oshim Kumar Betal, the faculty member, to take question. Is there, if there is any? Is there any other
Okay.
question? Okay. So let us call it a day. But before saying goodbye, let me actually, today is my son's birthday. So please
Oh,
bless him.
happy
I request
birthday!
everyone. And thank you,
Happy birthday!
Pinaki sir.
What is his name? What is his
For
name?
this one, his name is Tunabo Nag. Tunabo, Tunava. Tunabo.
Oh, what a beautiful name! Wow, what does it mean? I mean, I don't know.
Actually, it
What
means
does it mean?
flute. It means flute. Flute.
Wow, wonderful! How interesting! I mean, Tunabo, happy birthday! Many happy returns of the day. May you grow up to be a wonderful creative person.
Happy birthday to you, Eta.
Everybody is wishing you birthday. Look at the messages that's come out.
Yes, it's pouring.
Sourav, it has been
thank
wonderful.
you, everyone.
If there are any more questions, I just want to tell me. I have an email. It's pinakide@gmail.com. PINAKIDE. You can write directly to me. I think you can get answers. PINAKIDE@gmail.com. So can I just write it down somewhere? I think I can. So it's pinakide@gmail. Yes. So if you have any questions, you can. Yes, I have written it in the chat. Yes.
If you have any questions.
So people are actually sleeping for lunch, I think, Sourav. Lunch. Most of the people are going away for lunch.
Yes, it's time for the lunch. So let us call it a day. Thank you, Pinakida, for this wonderful session. And thank you, Nilanjanadi, once again for attending the lecture. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. So let us meet tomorrow. Yes, the 6th day of this international web lecture series, and we are going to have two slots. The panel includes two guest speakers. I shall inform you later on. I will send you mails with the links and the brochure for tomorrow. So till then, goodbye. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for hearing my gibberish.